Hi, we're here today and we're talking with Mrs. Mary Kay McPhee, and we want to talk with her because she is an incredible woman. She is a change agent, and we've been talking with Mary Kay about her work with the Missouri Association of Social Welfare, now known as Empower Missouri, and her legacy, her contribution. She's now 90 years old, and she's been helping us understand what it means to live a life of service. So, Mary Kay, we want to start off by asking you about your work with MASW, now known as Empower Missouri, because you're such a huge supporter of the work, and you've said to us several times that the work that the organization does is very important, and you told us why. So, can you describe again why it's important?
Yes, I can. And I became involved with MASW because a good number of my friends were involved at the same time. And we were interested in the same goals and so forth. Among those people was Inez Benson, was Herman Johnson, Dorothy Johnson, and others that really said, if you believe these things and you can see a way, help us do this. And that is what you continue to do. You have monthly meetings where you raise issues and have civil conversations about the issue from one point to another point and anywhere in between, and to say, how can we collaborate in making a positive difference in our area. And I love it. So I was involved simply because of Herman, okay, and Dorothy, and Inez Benson, who was at that point the chairman of Planned Parenthood, okay. It just focused and gave us a pathway to join others since 1903 on issues that if we came together and collaborated, we could have an impact. And I love it. I love it, love it. You're continuing to do these things, and I applaud you.
So when was that? What year was that you first decided to join Inez Benson, Herman Johnson, Dorothy Johnson, and all the other friends that you had who were working with Empower Missouri at that time? What year was that exactly?
I don't know. I can't remember. Maybe it's in my bio.
Okay.
When that was. But it had to be in the 60s, okay? Because a lot was happening in the 60s. And I watched MASW in a collaborative fashion work with others to heal the scars of the riots that were held here, okay? And they brought the right people together, okay? And did it with grace and very effectively.
So let's talk about the riots for just a few minutes. In 1968, the riots happened in Kansas City as a result of Dr. King's assassination. And you share with us your work with Herman Johnson in particular, who you also call your mentor. And can you tell us about Herman Johnson and the work that you all did as a result of the 1968 riots?
I think one of the things that Herman was a powerful man, and was the voice of reason. Sat on the city council, civic council, had a voice in Jefferson City, respected, and so forth. He was my mentor, and along with his wife. His wife was as important. She and I were appointed by the Jackson County Legislature as commissioners of child welfare. If you imagine this. So we had sites where children were brought by their families, and we took care of them. They would pick them up after school and so forth, or when they got off work. Herman, though, would help with Dorothy and me understanding how we could influence the state to understand the urban issues. A lot of times the state was dominated by rurally, okay? And they didn't understand a lot of the issues that urban areas had. And so Herman was our voice and the access through MASW and other ways.
So how was he involved with MASW? How was Herman?
He was the chairman, state chairman of MASW.
And how was his wife, Dorothy, involved with MASW?
Well, as less so, because she was the voice of the Kansas City Call, the African American newspaper here. Okay, so she had her own career. Okay, and he had his career. But together they were this absolutely dynamic couple that made worlds of difference.
Let's focus on that for just a minute. He had a sphere of influence and she had a sphere of influence. Let's talk about Dorothy Johnson's sphere of influence, because she was making history in her own right as a graduate of University of Kansas School of Journalism.
She had dual degrees from KU in the 1930s, when few people were going to college, couldn't afford it. But she went as an African American woman and achieved dual degrees, 1 degree in journalism, 1 degree in social work, okay? Now, think of what I'm saying. This was absolutely incredible, okay? Mm-hmm.
And what she did with those degrees, it sounds like it was just as incredible. And as you stated, working with her dynamic husband, they became the dynamic duo.
They were the dynamic duo.
And they were mentoring you, so you were the dynamic trio together.
Well, hardly. I couldn't rise to that level. But through my relationship with the two of them, I was able to see things through a different lens, okay, than I had before.
And you shared with us that one of the things you learned from Herman and Dorothy Johnson was about the importance of diversity and inclusion. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think they were both pioneers in that area, and so it was a tough road to hoe, okay, along the way. And they did it with grace, not with a fist, not challenging. They challenged in graceful, wonderful ways. To do such things, not only in the social welfare area, but to change our life socially, the social life. And I can remember the first time that they went to the Jewel Ball, okay, which is where the debutantes of Kansas City come out. This is high society in Kansas City. And they went to the Jewel Ball and did these things, and as well as the city civic council, as well as the newspapers, as well as all of these things. They did it with grace and with great knowledge. Mm-hmm.
So they were demonstrating a form of leadership by being the first, being fearless.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of being fearless, let's go back in time a bit to when you went to Topeka High School. And before that, your school experience was predominantly segregation. And when you went to Topeka High School for the very first time, you experienced exposure to diversity and inclusion. So can you talk about that in terms of what you shared, academically integrated?
This was a time of segregation. And so in Topeka, Topeka, Kansas, the elementary school and the junior high schools were segregated. But there was only one public high school in town, okay? And either you went to parochial school or you went to public school at the high school. So because there was one high school, that is when I first experienced the diversity that it was, but it was a different kind of diversity.
And can you describe what kind of diversity it was?
Well, I mean, academically, it was open to everyone. Socially, that was not true, okay? So, I think I've said this to you once before, but so when we would field a sports team, it was integrated. After the game, if they used to have a little dance after the game, and they were held on the school premises, it was segregated. So the African American went to their dance, and the Caucasians went to their dance, okay. And they had a king and queen of the school, also segregated.
Can you describe what would happen at those dances with the king and the queen, from the African American and the Caucasian each going to each other's celebration?
They had ceremonial dances at the all-school party. And so the African king and queen that had been elected by the African population, school population, would come to the Caucasian, they had the Caucasian king and queen, also elected by the Caucasians. And they would do a ceremonial dance. Now, I don't mean with each other, okay? I mean, but it was that they would dance, then the reverse would happen. And the Caucasians would go to the African American dance.
So you were prepared for diversity, and by the time you attended University of Kansas, you were exposed to even more diversity because of the veterans that were coming home.
Right.
And what happened then?
I was among the fortunate, I would say, because when I attended classes at the university, it was not just a bunch of 18-year-olds away from home for the first time. But because the returning veterans were there, the classes were large. They were very diverse. And these were mature men and women coming back. So when the topic, whatever the class was, they came at that with the experience that was one of the most liberating things that I had ever seen. To hear their voices, to know what they were talking about, to hear their gratitude for being given an education, which a lot of us just felt was our heritage. We just could do this, okay?
And what was your major? You told us a story about your counselor. Can you let us share that again?
I wanted to be a social worker and wanted that to be my major. And my counselor said, I don't think so, because you probably would not be able to leave those cases at the doorstep, and you would become emotionally involved, which was not good for you or for the clients. So he encouraged me to change my major. I became an education major.
And you graduated in
1945.
You also shared a story.
Oh, from college, 49. Okay.
You shared a story about being in an academic sorority and meeting an African American woman. And you were talking about your classrooms, and she showed you pictures of hers. Can you describe that experience and how that helped you become more aware?
When I was at KU, and I was in the School of Education, that School of Education had this, what do I want to say, the top academic people, it was based on grades, okay? And this African American woman was a member of that. I was a member of that. And we both got jobs after graduation, and I was in Kansas City, Kansas. And I was surprised when I went to the superintendent had the first meeting of the teachers. There she was, okay? And so we connected again and told stories, and she showed me pictures of her class. I was assigned as a third grade teacher, though I was trained for high school. They needed elementary school teachers. And I had 40-some 9-year-olds in my class. She had that many in her class. They were all African American, okay? They did not have indoor toilets at her school. Think of what I'm saying, okay? They had outhouses, this kind of thing.
What did that represent to you? Because you also talked about them not having lighting.
Lighting, but the bulbs, they had bare bulbs coming down with not even a shade, okay? And she had pictures to show me of these things. It was absolutely, I can't imagine that a school district would do that.
It was the same school district?
Yes, yes. Oh, yes.
All of that was preparing you for the work that you would do with Empowered Missouri, because you've been exposed now to
the inequities, to the issues that needed attention. Okay.
Let's talk about this very important document, which when you gave it to us, I realized that as a fellow educator, you were giving me homework. And I needed to go study, and so I did. And it says, Mary Kay Paige McPhee, dated June 7th, 2016, My Ethical Will. Can you explain to us why you decided to write an ethical will? This document that you generously gave Catherine, Torre, and I to learn from. How can we understand the purpose of this ethical will?
I guess I was motivated when I was looking at my own life and my own heritage, that I wish that my grandmother and my family had done this for me, to simply say how they became who they were and why they were involved in the ways that they were, what the world situation was, what their financial resources were, and many other things. So I guess I was just moved to say that I would hope that my grandchildren would benefit from learning about their heritage in this way.
And when you say heritage, what heritage do you have as a result of your grandparents and your parents?
I'm not sure you know what
The values that.
Oh, the values, yeah. So what I'm saying is that we have all kinds of wills, and we pass material things down. We pass money down. But an ethical will passes down values, okay, and principles, and so forth. So in the ethical will, each person writing an ethical will would examine from their own standpoint, where did those values come from? How did I get impassioned to do these things, okay? Mm-hmm.
And do you remember your 4 principal values? Education.
Education.
Social justice.
Social justice, yeah. And civil rights, yeah.
And then you had health and wellness because of your role as the spouse of a doctor. And you served as the president
of the American Medical Association.
The
auxiliary.
Mm-hmm.
We had 80,000 members at that point.
And your service as a president was for how many years?
Well, I think for 1 year, yeah, but you worked up to that.
And can you describe for us what you did as the president of the auxiliary?
Well, it was health and welfare, and I should give you my necklace. I could show you. Shape Up for Life was my theme.
And you traveled to every single state.
Right.
To?
This was a federation based on the physicians, and so they had organizations. Physicians of each state was organized with a state group. So as these were the public efforts of the American Medical Association for health and wellness. Mm-hmm.
And speaking of health and wellness, I remember that one of the questions was, how do you stay so healthy and well? What's your secret to being 90 years old now? So we can all get there.
Well, you know, I don't know that there is. I think genes probably is the major thing. I think I've got good genes for longevity. Okay. My mother lived a long, fruitful life. I guess, I don't know. I guess moderation. Mm-hmm.
And you have a wonderful sense of humor, so who did you inherit that from?
Well, I would mainly say my mother. Uh-huh.
Speaking of your mother, when you were the president of the auxiliary, your mother helped you
by taking care of my husband, who was in the early stages of Lewy body disease, okay? So when I had a trip out of town, she lived next door, so it was an easy kind of thing, and she was willing to do that. He didn't need full-time care, but to be there and to see that he was taken care of. She was the enabler that made me able to do that.
Who would you say in your family taught you the most about that responsibility to give back?
To give back? Oh, goodness, I'd say almost all of them. I think that's true in families, that you understand that you don't stand alone, that you do need to give back in special ways that you're able to. Mm-hmm. And it's not the same for every family or for every individual.
What's an example of how your family gave back? When you were growing up, what did you see them do?
I grew up in the 30s, okay? So I was fortunate. I had 2 parents who were employed. But they could only be employed because my grandmother took care of me, okay? So we would have breakfast at home, and then they'd drop me off at Grandma's house. And then they'd come home and we'd eat together. And then they'd drop me back off at Grandma's house and pick me up after work. So it was that kind of synergy in that family. And I'm not saying it was unusual. I think it was the way it happened in most families.
You also shared that your father raised you to be very independent and self-sufficient.
And that was the message I got. I was an only child. And so his message to me was, I want you to be totally independent. Do not be dependent on another person, okay? You need to have a career. You need to be able to support yourself should you need to.
Can you tell us about those vacations that you would take, your father and his Cadillac business, and the vacation you took where you had to identify the bird in order to get the nickel?
That is true. Because my father was in the automobile business, we took road trips on our vacations. But they were, by the time I was 13, I'd visited every state capital. I had been to Canada, Nova Scotia, Mexico, all in the car, you know.
What were you learning from your father? You told us he was an amateur naturalist?
Naturalist, So when we would go, we would have to understand the topography of the land, understand the as much as we could about the fauna of the land, understanding the animals, the birds.
And that scissor-tailed bird?
Oh, it's scissor-tailed flycatcher.
In order to get the nickel.
Yeah, that's right. Because when we would take these trips, we were expected to learn, okay, about where we were and what the history was. But it was also the difference in the topography and the animals that would be there, the flowers, the trees, everything, okay. And so he would put up little prize money, okay, which was at that time a nickel. So it would say, okay, be alert. There will be a prize for the first person to spot a scissor-tailed flycatcher, okay, or that kind of thing, you know.
And you won.
Huh?
You would win.
Well, I think it was put up to let me win.
And you told us that he made it a game, so you were having fun while learning.
That's true. It was good, always good. But he was a disciplinarian. I didn't get away with a thing.
You remember that story you told us about having to toe the line, and if you did something that your parents thought was out of order, you would say, and I want you to, you do it much better than that. Well, just, I never.
I do not ever remember being paddled, okay? But the expectations were there. And if I started to get out of line, they would say, oh my, we never expected that you would do such a thing, you know. Yeah.
And with education being number one, the value listed in your ethical will, what other ways did your mother in particular, because of the work that she did, instill the importance and the value of education in your life?
Well, I think when I speak about education, it's in its broadest terms. It's not just scholarly, okay, or degrees in education. But to have an open mind and learn and observe and so forth. But my mother was this adorable person. You know, I'm sorry. If you had not met Maggie, you would have loved her. You would have fallen in love with her instantly. She had a great sense of humor and made everything fun. Okay. She was a word person, and she worked for the Topeka Daily Capital, and they had something called Capper's Weekly that went out to rural areas besides the daily paper. And they would have contests in these, and my mother was the contest judge. So it would be, add a last line to this limerick, okay? Or how many words can you make out of this word, okay? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Given the value for education and the work that you still do, especially with UMKC, because we understand that KU is your alma mater, but you do a lot of work with UMKC. Can you talk about that, the work that you've been doing over the years with UMKC and what kind it is?
Oh, I think I love my alma mater, and I'm grateful for all that they have given me. But UMKC is Kansas City's university, and UMKC has 11 professional schools, everything from education to business to dentistry to pharmacy, all across the board. So those graduates affect every aspect of life in this city. Okay. And most of those graduates, a good percentage, stay in this general area. Maybe not in the city of Kansas City, but in the general area. So I think we owe them a great debt. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm a huge UMKC fan.
And what kinds of things have you done as a fan of UMKC? Established scholarships, supported programs?
Well, right, I've been involved in some scholarship work for women and for the Herman Johnson Scholarship. I still serve on that. Other scholarships.
And you told us also that there's a building on the campus of UMKC for Herman and Dorothy Johnson.
It is my understanding that it is a scholarship hall. And when that was dedicated, I was one of the speakers. There were several speakers. But the thing that was exciting about this, as far as I remember at that time, that was the first building on the university system that was named for African Americans. Is that fabulous or what?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And talking about your second top value, the first being education, the second is social justice. What has your work in social justice been?
Well, MASW, right there, among other things, yeah. But I love MASW for that, for all of those above reasons. They've been there since 1903 on the cutting edge of, and facilitating dialogue. of listening to all sides.
What would be an example of facilitating dialogue? What would be an issue where MASW has stepped in and helped everyone sit at the table and facilitate a discussion?
Well, I will say the 60s riots here in town, that's a big thing. One of the things that they did that I think put meat to the bones of some of the issues that were surrounding us. And MASW was one of those, a collaborative group of people, of groups that came together to heal the scars of the city. And they did this by bringing a coalition of people through the faith community, but many other ways together to simply say, okay, this is us, this is who we are, okay? Let's not cast stones, let's see what we can do. And they've done it. And they did it with, and I'm just throwing bouquets now, at Herman and Dorothy and Ella Stackhouse. I don't know whether you know Ella.
No, if you could tell us more about Ella Stackhouse, that would be wonderful.
Ella Stackhouse was this incredible African-American woman. She had a degree, a PhD in home economics, okay. And I love this woman, okay. And so when the riots occurred here, she was one of the instrumental people working to bring the coalitions together through the faith community, through others, to simply say, let us raise the food. The Johnson County Men's Garden Club would give us the seedlings, okay, for us to plant. And the city cleared the land. We planted the things. And but then it came the harvest, okay? And people would say, why? You're not going to, they'll steal this food before it gets there. Oh no, it's theirs. They're not stealing that. So Ella would come forward with her home economics thing. We had classes after the harvest, to learn how to freeze the food, learn how to dry the food, learn how to can the food with recipes and so forth to good. It was absolutely an incredible effort.
It sounds like she was empowering the community.
Oh,
to recover.
Yes. Oh,
that was
yes,
part of the healing.
Yes, absolutely.
And farming is a great way to learn how to work together.
Absolutely. And that came, following that, then we had community gardens and things, but she was on the fulcrum of that.
So we talked about the importance and the responsibility of our elected officials to be responsive, to be sensitive to the needs of their constituents, and the ways in which they need to do that. So can you share with us your wisdom?
No, I guess I'm really concerned that the two major parties are drawing the lines too strictly, okay? Too strictly. I think that they don't see how to work together as well. That Empower Missouri could give some classes, okay, on how to work together better, because it's on party lines a lot. The votes will, and the president is saying, okay, you've got this. I want you to vote this way. Not that hasn't always been that way. I'm sure it has, but still, it is the wrong. From my standpoint, it's the wrong way to simply say, this is the issue. And we have more than one way to deal with that. So let's talk about it and see what we can come up with that would be the most reasonable solution.
And how would our elected officials be more sensitive to the needs of their constituents?
I don't think they listen to the people. They do it through the media, through the, I'll say, news releases. They don't hold town halls where they might get a tomato. They don't do it as much. Maybe they do, but I don't think so.
It sounds like there needs to be more of a two-way street between the people who elected the officials and the officials who now need to be more responsible and accountable to the people who elected them.
I think that's true, and I don't think that they're nimble, nimble enough to go to understand that things change so rapidly now that they need to be on top of the issues and listen to the constituencies and the needs that there are there.
Given that we have apathy, disenchantment, discouragement, perhaps even depression about our country, how do we engage the next generation?
Not about the country, it's about the leadership of the country.
I stand corrected.
Not about the country itself.
I stand corrected.
No, okay.
So let's talk about that then. How do we re-engage the people of our country so that we will start to act in our best interest for the collective good, the collective well-being? How do we engage our young people so that the next generation will take up the reins, carry the torch forward? Voter participation, for example.
Board participation.
Voter.
Oh, voter participation, yes. I think that's right. I think that getting out to vote, I love it when buses take people to the voting, to the polls, okay? When neighborhoods rise up and say, these are the issues and we in this neighborhood will be impacted. Let's go. Let them know how we feel, what the issues really are, yeah. We need more of that, okay? Mm-hmm.
What did you think about the million women that showed up in Washington, D.C.?
Oh. Well, I have relatives that were there marching, okay? So I'm pretty much for that, okay?
What did you think about their ability to mobilize so quickly?
I think that they were able to use the technology to make that happen and to simply say, if you care about this or that or whatever the issues are, then we need your voice, okay? We need to make a statement.
Do you think that kind of energy can be tapped into
Of course.
moving forward?
Yes, yes. I have to tell you on the Women's March and so forth, but Ife and I were out in the car, and we had a local version of that here. And we had not gone to actually participate, but we got caught up in it. What happened, Ife?
We basically just ran into it, unbeknownst to us.
We became participants,
right,
active participants.
And so, I mean, we really enjoyed ourselves. We were just riding down and we just saw, different people, little kids on top of their parents' shoulders just participating in it. And then it was like, wow.
And as many men as women,
right.
which I loved. I mean, it was great. Mm-hmm. And came home feeling that in a very strange way we were part of it. Okay.
Right.
Ife, you are with Mary Kay a lot. Mm-hmm. So
every day.
Every day. What would you say about her as a change agent? She's humble. Mm-hmm. And I'm always getting her to answer this question, and she says, no. But you've spent a lot of time with her, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about her work.
Right.
So what would be something that you would say about her as a change agent, about the work that she does in service to others?
I think she kind of empowers people, not just women, just people in general, just to just to really get out there and do things that you really enjoy doing. She just kind of pushes you out there to go ahead and do it. Sometimes you're kind of scared to do certain things, but yeah, she'll encourage you just to get out there and really take advantage of it.
Now, does she do the same thing to you that she does to Catherine and I? Give us assignments?
Mm-hmm.
Here we are today with Mary Kay McPhee. We're very happy to be with you, Mary Kay, today to continue to talk about civic engagement. But before we start talking about your life of service, maybe you could just say a word about your grandmothers and how your grandmothers fed into who you are today.
They were very different. Two very different grandmothers. One lived where I lived, and the other one did not. So I was most influenced by the one that was closest to me. Okay, and but this woman lived through the 30s and knew how to make each dollar count, each experience count, but make it fun and a learning experience and great, okay? My other grandmother, now I must say both of these grandmothers were red-haired or auburn-haired, okay? So they were their own people, okay? My other grandmother was out there. She was married 3 times, didn't live here, you know. She was just doing her own thing, okay? And I'm not saying that critically. She was her own person, made her own contributions, but they were very different. And the impact on my life was very different. So I was an only child, and so I had the advantage of a lot of personal attention from my family.
So did your paternal grandmother help raise you?
Yes. Well, she did, in the fact that my family was very, I'll say, blessed during the 30s because I had 2 parents, both employed. So we had an income. But because I was this little person at that time, they dropped me off at my dad's mother's home, and she took care of me, okay, while they were at work. Okay. Always a learning experience.
Wonderful. And we understand that when you went away to university, you were the house manager at your sorority.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about why that experience was important for you?
I worked directly with the house mother at that time, and at that time we had 2 employed staff people, okay, besides the house mother. And one of them, they were both African American. The man ran the kitchen, okay, and planned the meals. So I worked with him, with the house mother, to try to keep the budget down and also what the sorority girls would eat, okay, and not eat. But this man was working on his PhD at that time. So my interaction with him was just invaluable, okay, because he was a learned person, and he had stories to tell that I had not experienced myself, and I learned from him. The upstairs maid was also African American, but she had a hickory stick in her back pocket for sloppy girls. And if we didn't keep our room straight and keep our clothes washed, she was on our back. We'd come home and all of our possessions would be in the hallway until we could clean ourselves up and get some order, okay? Learned a lot from those 2 people.
Okay. I also understand that Herman Johnson, who was very involved with Empower Missouri and was also the president of Empower Missouri in the 1970s, that you had the opportunity to travel to and from Jefferson City with him to Empower Missouri meetings. So if you could maybe just take a moment and think back to those road trips between Kansas City and Jefferson City. Could you just share some of the things that might have come up in your conversations during those road trips that has stayed with you, that's important, and that you might want to share with us?
Well, I consider Herman and his wife, Dorothy, mentors for me. And I learned so much from them. And during those trips back and forth to Jefferson City, Herman was able to open my eyes to more than one side of an issue, and do it gracefully and so forth. He was a huge force in civil rights and desegregation, as was his wife as well, both of them. They were wonderful, and I was privileged to work and know both of them.
So on those trips to Jefferson City, what might you talk about? What would
Whatever the emerging issues were in Kansas City, mainly, and how part of Herman's job would be as a legislator to make the other legislators understand a lot of the urban issues that were emerging. And there was a great deal of racism at that time, which was being addressed, and he was opening doors to say how best that could happen in urban areas.
And is there anything personally that you learned from him that maybe made you a slightly different person? Any particular skill or competence or insight about life?
All of the above. All of the above. Because I think a lot of us live in our own little cocoons, and he was instrumental in letting me emerge from that cocoon and to understand the larger dimensions and the social issues and the cultural issues that we were facing as a community. Okay, and I'll be forever grateful because he was, how do I want to say this? He was pointing out those things gently, but also a path that I could take to help with others understand. Okay.
With Dorothy Johnson, I understand that you were both child welfare commissioners together.
Right.
Could you say anything about the work that you and Dorothy did together?
Dorothy and I were appointed as commissioners of child welfare for the Jackson County legislature at that time. And that meant that we made visits to, I'll say, places that had child care and so forth, that were under the auspices of the county or the state or the federal government. We were part of that. And so her voice as the editor of the Kansas City Call, okay.
She was a journalist there.
As a journalist, you see, she brought the capacity to ask a lot of the right questions, okay, to, as a journalist, to make the greater community understand, not just from the call, but from another perspective as well, okay? So it enlarged the voice that she had, okay.
Okay. And a last question about the Johnsons. Why are you a little bit insisting that Empower Missouri look more into the lives and social contributions of Dorothy Johnson and Herman Johnson? Why might that be important, or why is it important?
Well, I can only speak for this community, and I'm sure St. Louis would have the same thing, Springfield would have the same stories to tell. But if you could gather those stories, because Missouri is such a diverse state, and we come at, I think we border 8 other states, and we come at those issues very differently, okay, very differently. And I really see Empower Missouri as trying to, and they have been a force of trying to consolidate some of the principles and values and ethical issues that encompass all of those areas.
So by looking into the lives of people like Dorothy Johnson and Herman Johnson and others across the state of Missouri, that can help us somehow.
Absolutely. And I would suggest that you contact UMKC about why the university chose to name this large residence hall for those 2 people, and what caused them to put all of their money and forces into that, because there's much to learn at that. They had, I was one of the several speakers at that. I could go back and find my remarks.
Wonderful. And why is the Herman Johnson Scholarship Fund so important in your view?
I think I think it is. Tara Johnson chairs that, Dorothy and Herman's daughter, and but I believe the process is the key. A lot of scholarship funds, I think, students write applications and so forth, and those are reviewed by whomever, and then they're chosen. This group personally interviews everybody as well, and that builds that I'll say relationship. It strengthens it, and so forth. And I believe it's the right thing to do.
So it's more of a personal approach.
We have a personal investment. The scholarship committee has a personal investment in the scholarship recipients, and we keep up with them. and look at their successes and the things that we have been a very teeny-weeny part of making some good things happen.
So it's more than money.
It's lots more than money. Right. It's an investment.
Empower Missouri existed from 1901. And Empower Missouri is going to have to transform itself for the 21st century. So can you say anything about things to keep in mind as organizations grow and keep up with the times and transform themselves to remain relevant?
I cannot think that I would have one single word of advice for you. You all know what to do. You've done it for 100 and some years, and you've done it well. And one size does not fit all, but the ethics and the principles and the guidance there is the same. But how that is translated into effective programming is different from community to community, and you understand that because you have people and members in those various communities that will help find roads for implementation.
You are active in Kansas City. You're active in Missouri. We know you've been active nationwide as well with the the auxiliary of the American Medical Association. Could you also mention something about your international travels? Because we're wondering if, having been abroad and outside of the country, what impact that might have on who you are and the work that you're able to do.
I'm not sure I understand the question entirely, but Kansas City has a sister city, Seville, Spain. And I was that person to deliver the greetings from Kansas City to Seville, Spain at one time, which was very exciting. It was a lovely experience. And that sister city group still exists. I don't know how much they do with the sister cities, but it's the right kind of thing to do for every community to have that close relationship. And if you go down on the plaza, you'll see flags and other things.
I know that you went to East Africa, not necessarily for work, but more for enjoyment. Could you say a word about your travels to Africa?
Well, I went definitely as a tourist, tourist type, and so the agenda that we had was not necessarily my agenda. It would have been the group that I went with, and I went with an international group at that time, and so it was well done. I learned a lot, opened my eyes to things that maybe I had skimmed over or read a little bit about, but it was brought to life.
We know that you've been on a lot of boards. You've been a board member and served different organizations in that capacity, and that you've been an advocate for board development. Could you say a word about board development and why that's important for you, or what you've learned about board development perhaps over the years?
Well, I think a lot of times, and I've said this to you before, but I believe a lot of times people find it a point of honor to be asked to serve on a board of directors of a nonprofit organization. And I'm speaking of nonprofit organizations now. I'm not sure that we do a good enough job when we recruit these people, that they understand the immense responsibility that they have and how they should be able to enhance that through their own connections and their own wisdom.
And do you have any advice because we know you wanted to be a social worker, you studied education and worked as a teacher and are committed to education. Do you have any advice for educators of today or those preparing to become educators in the 21st century?
Well, I just think that it starts with their own education. So I would say that the effort that should be made is for the educational institution that trains them, that they see that that institution gives them the hands-on experience to actually see through some lens the people that they need to deal with, and how the social workers, need to enlarge their lens, okay, to understand from a different point of view. We can never understand that really. We can't walk in someone else's shoe, but we can understand it a little bit better than we do. So that's why I think universities are key. And I don't care what the discipline is, okay? This is the overriding thing that is true for every single discipline at the university, not just social work, not just educators, not just lawyers. It's for everyone, okay?
For everyone to do what?
It is, yes. It's the mission of the university has to be understand that these things are common to every professional school that they have.
To broaden the horizons of the students.
Exactly, exactly. Because the people with whom they shall deal in their professions and so forth, we just need to open their eyes to the larger picture.
Okay. Could you mention anything about this organization that we did not know existed in Kansas City that has apparently nourished you over the years to some degree, called the Watering Hole?
It's not an organization.
Okay.
It is just a group of women. It is not an organization. Yeah, it's just a group of women that get together, and it's a diverse group of women that get together regularly and just talk about current issues, what's going on, and how there's no, what do I want to say, push to say that you need to do something, but it's voluntary, okay? So you see what the larger picture, and therefore the motivation is there. And you've got a lot of sisters helping you.
And where does the term watering hole come from? What does this mean?
Comes from Africa. And it is where the women would go twice a day to pick up water and so forth, and it was their time to engage with each other at that early morning time and the end of the day time. And this was their time that they visited with one another, that they supported one another. And so that's the concept of this little group of women.
And would you have a last word to share with our young people about this concept of civic engagement, what that means, how you prepare for it, and maybe people want to get involved, but they just don't know where to start?
How do you start? Raise your hand. Raise your hand to volunteer, okay? And I think volunteering is the key to that. And it can lead to careers, it can lead to passions, it can be it opens the doors, it opens your eyes. That's what it is, okay? So it's volunteering to say, yes, I can help, okay? I have something to offer. And those somethings put together make a big difference. I was on the board of the community blood bank here for a long time. And what I learned, among the things that I learned there, was the very fact that of our commonality. So if you need a blood transfusion, which many of us need at some point in our lives, you do not ask from whence it comes, okay? because it is the commonality that binds us all together and so forth. So that's one small example of the larger thing to say that what binds us all together. The blood is one, okay. We do not say how old was that person. Was it a male or female? Was it religiously, who were they? What was the color of their skin? We don't ask that. We all know that the life-giving blood, if it matches yours, is the Savior, yeah.
What is a good leader, and what is the role of kindness in being a good leader? Mm-hmm. Did you have any thoughts on?
Only that kindness is a common denominator for us all, okay. And I think that in most cases, the American ethic allows us to fulfill that. We're there if our brother needs help in many, many cases and in various avenues to help, okay? If we all can't be there physically, we can give $1 to help, or we can give possessions to help, or we can transport people or things. There are all kinds of ways to do this. And all of those add up to kindness, okay? It's across the board. I belong to this one group, the Watering Hole, that I was spoken of before. And Sue Ellen Freed, who was the founder of that group, always said, kindness is contagious, catch it. That was their theme of the Watering Hole. Kindness is contagious, catch it.
And does kindness ever have to be firm? Does kindness ever have to be strong? Or if you are kind, are you allowed to challenge things?
Oh, sure. Because that's probably in everyone's best interest. In the person that you're being kind to, and yourself, okay, yeah.
Okay.
And those with whom you collaborate to do a good deed.
This concept of leadership, I mean, you've seen a lot of people in leadership positions, you've seen many different styles of leadership. So do you have a word about...
I think I probably put it in the ethical will. But leadership is not about you. It is about empowering others, okay, and listening to their wisdom, and not top down, but bottom up.
And my fear about kindness is that if we think kindness is just giving our brother a glass of water, I wonder if that keeps us from some of the structural changes that are necessary.
I think it's a combination of both. It has to be. Okay. The giving has to come with learning.
I feel like you've given me another pair of eyeglasses that I can use to look at certain situations, and it adds depth, I believe, to my interactions, and I'm really appreciative of that, and I'd like to thank you.
I know in my own case, one of the things that has helped me in my journey has been the capacity that others have shown me. Others have shown me how to see certain issues, certain situations, certain things that come across our paths through a different lens. And to also understand that some of those things, the issues themselves, are beyond our control. But it's not beyond our control how we deal with it, okay? Not beyond our control. We can do that. And we can open up to try to see the several dimensions of every single issue, more than one.